Never meet your idols. That was the topic that I mentioned in the last video. Touched on it very briefly. And in this day and age, who are our idols anymore? When I look at celebrities and I look at people showing up to the Grammys last night, we got Will Smith's son showing up with a house on his head. So who is it we're aspiring to look at in this modern era? But with that topic in mind, if you give me 10 minutes today, I'll tell you a story about a world famous football player, a world famous band, and lastly, an A-list movie star. And I'll tell you a little tale about all three and how they're joined together. Come for a little stroll with me and I'll tell you this tale. I was born and raised in a town called East Kilbride, just outside Glasgow. It was a new town formed after the war, and I've lived there almost all my life before Yvonne and I moved to Glasgow and then later to England. Now, I mentioned in the last video about how I'd had the opportunity to meet some heroes of mine, Metallica, and I think I conveyed the message that that meet had gone very well. It was a great interaction and it stuck with me to this day. Now, where that's a little different, and the topic for today's story about meeting your heroes and those interactions, let me tell you, when I was a kid, when I was about, I think 9 years old, I had just started to really get into football, started playing with a local club, and I was just really captured by the whole team camaraderie and learning a new skill and everything that went along with it. And my dad was a football fan. He played football himself up until he'd broken a leg. And so I was out one day in the car with my dad and we're out for a little drive, and he says to me, "Oh, there's somebody famous up ahead," as we drive along a street in East Kilbride. And I can see this figure up ahead, and my dad toots the horn, Scottish, right, for he blasts the horn, doot doot, and the shadowy figure up ahead turns round, spots who's in the car, and gives a wave, and my dad pulls over next to this figure and decides to say hello. So, you know, we didn't have electric windows in the car, so he leans across the side of me, wee boy in the front, and he winds the window down, and I hear him say, "Hey Ali, how are you getting on?" Now, to people that might not be football fans or know much about Scotland and football, but Ali, as he was affectionately known, Ali McCoist, was currently the Rangers centre forward. And over the years, he's gone on to be an absolute icon. But what I didn't know in this moment that was transpiring was that in my dad's younger years, he worked in a bookies where you would go to gamble on horses or football and that kind of thing. My dad worked in there from when he left school, and it turned out that Ali McCoy's dad lived just round the corner, and like the occasional flutter, my dad had got to know Ali McCoy's dad over the years and subsequently got to know Ali. And so here I am. None of this is aware to me. My dad pulls over, winds the window down, chats with Ali, and I'm sitting there like a 9-year-old in the front seat. This is my first like famous person interaction. My jaw's probably hanging down. I'm blown away as a kid. But more importantly, this is like the kind of dad points that parents, fathers, they live their lives trying to achieve, right? This is the first moment to be like in front of your own son. Look, I know this guy and he knows me. And when I look back on it, I could just, I can envisage the look on my dad's face, just the sheer excitement and pleasure that this is playing out, that I'm like, oh. And McCoist Ali is being super cool. "Hello John, how you doing?" Chatting away to my dad. "How's things? You been to any of the games?" Right, so I'm blown away by this first celebrity, first sports person interaction is playing out in front of me. And I'm thinking, oh, this is amazing. Now, you know how that eventually worked out? A couple of months later after that meet, it was my birthday, January 9th, covered in the first video. And so my dad takes me to Ibrox. This is the stadium where Rangers play in Glasgow. And we wait outside the stadium, just no appointments, no schedules, just waiting outside the stadium. And then Ali McCoy shows up in a taxi, says, "Hello, John, good to see you, young John, come on with me." Takes me into the stadium, gets to meet all the players, gets the handshakes. It's my birthday, so they're all giving it, "Hey, how you doing, wee man?" Ruffling the hair and all that. I get a calendar signed by all the players, still got that. And I'm just blown away by the whole situation. They take me across to the football training ground, and I watched the players train that day. And at 9 or 10 years old, I think that would have been, it's never left me. That first interaction has never left me. So, never meet your idols. First point, that interaction went well, and it left a big imprint on me ever since. So that was my first tale. International footballer. Ali McCoy's played at the World Cup, played for Scotland, played for Rangers, became the Rangers manager. So I think he's up there. He's still a prominent commentator now on the TV with his cheeky Scottish commentary. So that was my first interaction. Now, see, for this second interaction, I need to set the scene just a little bit. In my early teens, I used to deliver newspapers, the Sunday newspaper to be exact. They used to weigh an absolute ton, be like Sunday magazines, the TV guide for the rest of the week. There was a lot, right? But I think I did about 100 houses, and I would earn some cash. So I would go to the newsagent on a Sunday morning, and if it wasn't raining, I would walk there. And if it was raining, my dad would take me in the car. Talk about being a pampered child, right? But if it was absolutely chucking it down with rain, my dad would take me in the car, and that would make life a bit easier. And as a side story to all of that, I used to do the papers, deliver the papers, sort them out with a girl that I went to school with, Lindsay, her name was. And Lindsay, I always remember, was allergic to paper. So she delivered newspapers, but she had to wear these big thick rubber gloves because she couldn't touch the paper, otherwise her hands broke out. And I always thought, of all the jobs that you could do to earn a bit of cash, why would you do one that you are physically allergic to? Anyway, I digress. So I would deliver newspapers, right? And one of the houses that I used to deliver newspapers to was just one house away from where I lived with my dad, right? So there was our house, a house, and then this family's house. And the gentleman there who used to get the papers delivered, his name was Thomas Reid. Tam, as he was known. Good, affectionate, shortened Scottish name, but Tam Reid. But as a kid, I grew up with that element of respect, right? So he was Mr. Reid. He was always called Mr. Reid. So I would deliver papers to Mr. Reid, and to me, he was always a super friendly gentleman. We'd chat away. "Hello, John, how you doing?" Anytime I was collecting the money for the papers or whatever, he was super chatty. And occasionally, he would come in to the local pub, and I would go there and have maybe a cheeky pint with my dad, right? So the Calderwood Inn, local pub to my dad's, also the local pub to Mr. Reid. So Mr. Reid would come across, maybe pop into the pub if I was in there with my dad, and my dad would take me in there, Calderwood Inn, from the age of about 15. Now, my dad used to work in there, so he knew the staff. He worked in the pub as well as the bookies. So the staff knew him from all those years ago. And so when I came in, there was never really any issue with getting a pint, right? It was that kind of trust where it's like, do anything daft and you won't be back in here. So you kind of respected it a little bit. Mr. Reid had 2 sons and a daughter. Linda, William and Jim. Now, they were a little older than me, so I didn't really have much of a connection to them, but I would see them around all the time. I'd see them around the local streets, and I think they were probably the same year as my sister at school, or my brother, one of them. So, Linda, William and Jim. Now, William and Jim were in a band, and that band was called the Jesus and the Mary Chain. Now, the Jesus and the Mary Chain are like the originators of a style of music called shoegaze, which is kind of like warm fluffiness of like indie music. Lots of reverb, lots of delay, lots of jangly guitars, but they were massive, right? So I lived one door away, unbeknown to me in my youth, from one of the world's greatest ever indie independent rock bands, the Jesus and the Mary Chain. And as a side note to that, the Jesus and the Mary Chain, when they started, used to have a drummer in the band called Bobby Gillespie. And here's a question for you. Does anybody know in the comments below which band Bobby Gillespie left the Jesus and the Mary Chain to form? Let me know down in the comments if you know who he is. So I lived just doors away from a world famous band and didn't really understand any of that until a few years later, when I was more kind of in my 16 to 18-year-old phase, still living at home with my dad. So in 1996, I go into the pub with my dad. I think it's about October time, and we're in the pub, and in comes Mr. Reid. And he comes in and he says to me, "Hello, John, hello." John Senior, as they called my dad. John Senior, John Junior. How the two of yous doing? Gets a pint, comes and stands and talks to us. Now, some months before, I can remember a little bit of drama with the arrival of a really large limousine into the street. And that limousine pulled in, and I saw Mr. and Mrs. Reid come out, get in the car and head off on a day out. So no idea what's going on, but months later he's in the pub, we're having a chat, having a pint, and I thought, good opportunity to ask him, right? This is the chance to find out what that limousine was all about. So, having the beer, right, Mr. Reid, what was going on with the limousine? Oh, did you see that son coming into the street? Oh, what a palaver. That's the boys, they organised that. And I said, so what were you doing? And he said, oh, I was getting taken VIP with Mrs. Reid to a music festival, something down in Strathclyde Park. Now, in 1994, Strathclyde Park, Strathclyde, part of Scotland, a music festival was announced, and it ran in that location for 3 years, 94, 95, 96. In 94, it was headlined by then current popular band Rage Against the Machine and somebody called Oasis. But in 1996, it was being headlined by Pulp and Radiohead. And it just so happened that Mr. and Mrs. Reid were invited to attend. Now, Jesus and the Mary Chain, they weren't actually playing at the event, but they'd organised for their mum and dad to go VIP style to the festival to hang out for the day and get a bit of the glitz and glam. And they get in that limo and they go down to the show. So he's standing with the pint telling me, what a faff, what a walk, we're away down there. You know, they must have been maybe late 50s, 60s, something like that, I don't know. Anyway, limo picks them up, takes them to the festival, and now the last part of this story, the A-list movie star. So, Mr. Reid's telling me he's in the VIP area and he's having a drink and he's hanging out, and some guy comes up, starts telling him just how important the boys are to him, how amazing the Jesus and the Mary Chain are, how influential they are to this guy having a band. The reason that they're actually at T in the Park making their first kind of international debut, driven by this A-list celebrity. And so I'm asking Mr. Reed, who's the A-list celebrity? Who are you talking about? And he's like, oh son, I can't remember his name. It was a complicated name. And I'm like, and what does he do in the band? He's the bass player, right? And you said about movies, aye, he's been in some movie pretty recently. Famous movie about a bus. Now at this point, your brain's processing this and you're thinking, a bus, a bass player, a band. If you're getting it, good for you. Tell me in the comments if you've guessed it already. So I looked at him and I said, a bus movie? Is it called Speed? And he says, yes. Now, Speed came out in 1994, 2 years before this. However, this is the band's debut. And so he's telling me, aye, the boy's telling me, oh, your lad's so influential, I met them in LA, or they're amazing, or it's the reason I've got my band. And I'm like, what's his name? And he goes, this is Mr. Reed, says to me, Kunu Revs. Kunu Revs, right? Now, I'm standing there, I'm 18 years old. This gentleman, super nice man, been buying papers off me for years, is standing there telling me he's been hanging out with Kunu Revs. I'm like, Keanu Reeves? And he's like, that's the one, son, that's the one. Ah, he's just going on and on and on in my ear. So I'm blown away by this. Keanu Reeves, Hollywood superstar, apparently one of the nicest guys in Hollywood. He's telling Mr. Reed about how influential his sons are. Mr. Reed's no idea who Kunu Revs is, and he's telling me this story. And I'm standing there thinking, you know that whole discussion about the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon, you know, 7 degrees of separation, and then you change it to Kevin Bacon because he's been in so many movies. Well, here's a moment here where I'm within those 7 steps from Keanu Reeves as an 18-year-old kid who loved the movie Speed, but I was blown away by this story. So I met a football player. My dad gets all the credits for that one. I met the team. Again, well done, Dad. Dad points right there. I lived one door away from a world-famous band that I now completely understand and respect. And lastly, I got a really cool story that's lived with me for all these years, still makes me chuckle about Kunu Revs. So this is the question for you lot. You ever met your idols? Have you met your heroes? How did it go? Was it the way you wanted? You still thinking about it like I am? Or was it disastrous? Tell me down in the comments. Now, in the next video, I'll tell you where I am. But if you can guess this location, you'll also win some channel points. Just some plaudits for you if you can identify where I am. But on Thursday's video, I'll explain all. Thanks for watching. Like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you on Thursday's video. Be safe.